Hello, and thank you for listening to Critical Thinking is Required. This is reflection number 6. And if you already don't know, the reflections are basically like a way for me to just analyze and discuss the articles that I write on the blog on criticalthinkingisrequired.com. So you can check that out. If you want to read the blog entry, you can do that. If you don't, you can just listen to this. I'm trying to find a way that I can have shorter episodes, because the episodes are like an hour long, because it has to be, because it's a lot of content. And this is going to be, the reflections are supposed to be something a little bit shorter. So it's either something I pick a article I wrote about, which is just about a really small topic or just a few little issues, or it's a big issue that I've really condensed really small, or it's just something I've been thinking about for a long time, like I've done with when I was in the police academy. I talked about that. So this is just another one, and this is just about the article that's titled "The Election Game is Rigged." And so basically the whole article, I actually had the idea, it was just like kind of on a whim. I was just looking in Facebook groups and stuff, and someone had posted something about here in Florida with the Libertarian Party in Florida. And just to let you know, even if you don't vote, I still think this is an important reflection to listen to, just to learn kind of the way the system is rigged. And this is really just one way. You know, there's multiple ways that it's rigged, but this is pretty significant. And, you know, there's this huge, I heard it from I was reading about it in a blog post in a group page on Facebook, and they were just discussing how people were, basically these people in positions they're running for governor, like governor is something that's up here in Florida, and they're getting a lot of money from donations, but they're also getting a lot of money from public financing. So it's actually taxpayers' money that pays for this stuff. And unfortunately, none of the minor parties, so that, regardless of the Libertarian Party, I'm talking about other parties as well, because there are other candidates, whether they're write-in or for another party, and they don't get funding either. And so it made me think, because I've been hearing a lot about, I don't know what it is, like the Wolf Pack, or I don't know what it is, but there's all these advancements for, Citizens United is a huge ordeal. And we kind of discussed it in one episode about our corporation's people, although not really. We didn't really fully analyze it. But basically, Citizens United is blamed for all this stuff. It's basically blamed for corporatism and oligarchy, which is just ridiculous, because we've had this stuff really since the founding. And then we had it in Britain, and then they had it before that and before that. And it's a lack of looking at the big picture instead of just the small last 20, 30 years. And even then, you can look at other correlations and say, this is the cause of the oligarchy, not necessarily Citizens United. And, we actually discussed that when we were reading the For New Liberty, I think, in the literature series that we have as well on Critical Thinking is Required. And, he talked about how we went off the gold standard internationally in the 70s as well. So you had all these things happening at about that time, and so it might not be Citizens United. It could possibly be because money it officially was backed up by nothing after that period of time, and so now it's completely fiat currency, which buys votes from everyone, not just corporations and not just unions. And it could be welfare recipients, it could be veterans, it could be groups that might deserve some sort of money, I suppose, who put in their time, and it's still a benefit for them. Although they're losing from it too, especially with inflation. That is something we don't talk about as well. But yeah, put that all aside. It's supposed to be short, but I just wanted to talk quickly about, you can read it on the blog, and it's just interesting because as I was researching, so yeah, there's all these people who are just hating Citizens United. They're saying, hey, let's have a constitutional amendment. Let's say corporations are people, but it's not even just that. So there was like an actual amendment I saw somewhere else where it said they would actually write something like that. But this one is actually giving Congress the power to regulate this stuff. And so like this one is, I'm trying to think of the words exactly. It says it's going to give the power to, quote, regulate the raising and spending of money and in-kind equivalents with respect to elections, including setting limits on the amount of contributions, etc. So basically, it's giving this broad regulation power. So, and it's, whether you think money is speech or whatever, it really doesn't matter, because at this point what this does is it allows anything, and in kind, I don't even know what that would mean, so anything that deals with money at all that is given to these people candidates can be regulated. And of course, as we know in other Supreme Court decisions, regulate means anything. I mean, they can do anything. So where we're taking it down from, and this is where I get with, there's different standards of review that the Supreme Court uses when they look at certain cases. And so strict scrutiny is usually what applies, and that's the highest standard. There has to be, oh man, it's been a while here, but let's just say it has to be a very big, significant, a narrow interest, right? It's a compelling interest. Yeah, there we go. It'll come back up. A compelling interest. So something really important, and that would make the law constitutional if it was a compelling interest, it was narrowly tailored. But once you say something like they can just regulate it and you take that away, because that's what this amendment would do, and that's what progressives are calling for. Unfortunately, they're not really thinking critically about it, looking at the different aspects here, and they're going to reduce that power. And God knows if this power could be reduced to other things as well. I know it does say that it means nothing to affect, like it specifically says in the amendment, it does nothing to affect the freedom of the press. Well, what the hell? What does that mean? What about the freedom of individuals? Like, so somehow the press is more important than the people. And why is the press at issue? Does the press give money? I mean, that worries me. Like, I fear that they're gonna. Yeah, this is bad. This is like Ginsburg can jump on this and just say, you can't even. I don't know. It could be a troubled time, and we could just jump on it and say you can't say. What they did recently in Germany, where they prohibited talking about ISIS. So what I do on this show where I talked about ISIS, I'm going to be doing probably a reflection on ISIS soon because I'm going to do a blog entry about it. I could go to jail. Like that's crazy. That should not, no, that's not a free whatever, even close to it, right? Although I don't know if Germany considers himself that, but yeah, so they have this. So I looked into that, and yeah, the amendment just sounds awful, and they're going to give them so much power, which is odd because they already have power. They have this thing called federal public funding, which basically, when you hear people talk about public financing, well, we already kind of have it, okay? Maybe the rules could be changed, I suppose. You could argue that. I kind of argued that eligibility standards could change, but we already have it. And since 2000, I think it was like $470 million. $470 million that's been given to these parties. And most of that, yeah, $454 million since 2000, since the year 2000. That was originally passed, I think, in 1970. So it's over $1 billion, I think, total that the government, through taxpayers, have spent on conventions, through campaign spending, all this stuff for the major two parties mostly. Because since 2000, out of that $454 million, so that's been spent for the two main parties, then $22 million for other parties. Now, of course, when you look at presidential elections, which most of this money goes towards that, it's actually just presidential primary. Yeah, and that's even worse. I don't know if there's a separate congressional one, which would make it even worse. But so usually for a president, there's multiple parties and there's multiple individuals who are running, although you often just hear of the top two and maybe a third, maybe even like a Jill Stein in the Green Party or something. But there's multiple. There's Constitutional Party. There's all these other things. Reform. There's Socialist Party. Everything. And so you get $22 million that's kind of spread among those people, assuming they can even get that, because you have to reach a threshold. You have to get a certain amount of money. So in this aspect, you have to get $100,000 before you can even get this money. So before you can even try to get public financing, you have to be able to get $100,000. Now, of course, that's easy for incumbents, and that's easy for people who have this institutional power and control. And it was interesting. I had just watched this morning. This is Sunday. You don't know what day, but like the exact day, I don't even know. But Bernie Sanders was on Meet the Press or one of those morning shows, and I had just watched a clip from it. And he had said he's not running as an independent because of the infrastructure. So he says he's thinking about running for president in 2016 as a Democrat because it has a better infrastructure. So basically what he's saying is that, and God knows what that means, but basically what he's saying is he loses the third party. And it's not because of Citizens United. That's not what he's arguing, right? He's not arguing that because he could win as a Democrat is what he's saying. Otherwise, he wouldn't try at all, right? Or he would make a principled stand and run as an independent. And Ron Paul did the same thing, right? So even to libertarians, we go, oh, well, he was a Republican, he's evil, right, or whatever, or a hypocrite or something. But he probably did it for the same reason, for that infrastructure. And again, that just shows it's not Citizens United. It's this infrastructure. Again, they've gotten $454 million. I mean, you get it automatically because you have the infrastructure in place. You have people who are getting paid to do this stuff. by the party. Like the party itself pays people. People make real wages to go out there and get people to vote and to get signatures. And so it's a lot easier for them to get the signatures and to get funds. And then they have big people who show up and have dinners and all that. It's a lot easier for them than for Jill Stein to invite who? Who's going to go to a Jill Stein thing? Everybody's, nobody, right? And maybe eventually, I don't know. But yeah, so I was looking at that. There's a really good, picture in there or document in there that I put in there, and it's the public funding fact sheet since 1970. And we used to spend a crap load for these conventions. I think one year, 2004, 2000, it was like $40 million for these conventions for 1 year. And again, that's just Democrat and just Republican. And you wonder why we've been spending record amounts of spending. And it's matched. So it's like you have to reach that threshold, and then it's sort of matched by the government, whatever future additional donations they get. And then I talked briefly about Florida stuff because I'm in Florida, and I thought some of this stuff was really amazing. I added something. I actually revised this article, so I don't know when you exactly read it. But I added the Commissioner of Agriculture here. It's a cabinet member here in Florida, and he's an incumbent. I think he's a Republican. I don't know for sure, but he's gotten $400,000 in public campaign funds. $400,000 just this year to run. And then the two challengers, and one's a Democrat, so he or she could be getting some help, but depending on if they can actually raise, because you have to raise a certain amount of funds before you can get public assistance. It's like that's a really interesting thing. It's like to get unemployment insurance, you have to be able to have a certain amount of money in order to get unemployment insurance. Like, it doesn't really make sense, but then it kind of does, and it brings me to my sort of bottom point with this whole article is that this is an example. This is a perfect example of the ruling class, the intellectuals, the people who are in charge of the state, right, and the government, is they make the rules. The checks and balances approach, right? You have three powers, but they all make their own rules, okay? And they're all government employees. So what do you think they're going to do? You think they're going to be objective? Like, who are they answering to? They're not answering to the people, right? They don't have to. It's inherently impossible to have some sort of price mechanism when even if there was like a public financing and it was completely public, like let's say there were no outside donations, there would still be requirements, right? You'd have to say there's 100,000 signatures. And who's going to get that? Well, the incumbent's going to be, it's going to be much easier. And Rick Scott can prove that. And that's why he hasn't really accepted any public financing here. He's the governor of Florida. Why he hasn't accepted it? Why? Because he doesn't need it. He's the incumbent. He can go to whatever news station or whatever and just say, hey, I'm going to give you 5 minutes of my time. Yeah, worship me. And you're going to edit this stuff to make it look good, right? And they're going to do that because they want that relationship. And so you have a fundamental flaw, even if government was somehow in charge, and even if somehow they were objective. It's like gerrymandering and saying that they can somehow objectively, make these perfect shapes into the districts and setting how, we're going to make sure there's some Democrats and some Republicans. That's not what they do. It's the same thing. What they do in that case is they put all the Republicans together and all the Democrats together so they can keep power, and they can keep the third parties out as well. And they control this monopoly, and that's what happens. Again, there's no competition. So, and they're going to do just what any business does. It's all in their self-interest, which is to make rules and make laws satisfy their needs. And here, the need of any politician, especially in the top two parties, is going to be to get money, to get free money, right? I mean, that's what happens. And again, they're not answerable to anybody because we don't hold them accountable, for one. And because the system's set up to not be that way. And it's inherently impossible to do so, just like I said, with some public financing law in the future. But that's basically today's reflection. I appreciate you've taken the time to listen. It's also a video, so if you want to see me and my crazy-looking self on our Facebook or our YouTube page, Critical Thinking is Required, you can also watch it for some reason. I don't know if you don't want to do that. But this is supposed to be a podcast, and I like the podcast format because that's what I like listening to. But we're just trying to reach out to more people if we can. But thank you for checking out, listening, and make sure you check out the blog post. Make sure you read it. Make sure you comment or like on it. Like it and share it with other people, and we can spread this show as we can. But thank you for listening, and as always, think critically.